Děkuji za pozvání, já jsem si dal za úkol mluvit česky. Ale jenom chvilku, protože pozvání do takovéhle budovy, aby jsem tady mluvil anglicky, to bych se musel stydět, tak jsem řekl pár slov, řeknu česky, omluvám se tlumočníkům. Now I'll speak in English, because I was asked to speak in English. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really honored to speak such a distinguished audience and in the building like this. I will be talking about the war crimes in the former Yugoslavia. When I received this invitation, I thought, how can I add something to the agenda here? You know, because the typical investigation of war crimes might not be necessarily what you are interested in, even though the topic is interesting, and particularly for me, because I spent more than 10 years on it. But I thought there is an aspect of it, and the aspect is the fake news. The fake news, how it was used in the former Yugoslavia, and the consequence of it. Like, I want to start on a little bit lighter note, a little bit of music, because I need to bring you into the feelings of the Balkans in the 1990s, to understand how dangerous it is to insert the fake news into post-conflict environment. Okay, we will start with the presentation. I hope that Ozzy or Here's Ozzy Osbourne for that, because of the lyrics of the music. We are all dreamers. We all look out of the windows and want to see something nice. Nobody wants to look out of the window and see the ruins of their cities. So when you look out of the window, you might see this beautiful Prague. And then when people in Vukovar, in the former Yugoslavia, when they look out of their windows, they saw this: a Danube, old buildings. They live in a peace for a number of years from the end of the World War II. And they wanted to see this. And then this is what they saw shortly after. What I want to tell you this, you know, the war, as it happened in former Yugoslavia, it wasn't invasion. It wasn't something that was kind of imported into the region. This was the war of neighbors. They lived together in the villages, in the towns. They married each other, cross-ethnics. There are statistics about, I don't know how many, during the Tito's time, when the brotherhood and unity was the important topic for them. You know, we all lived together. How many marriages were across the ethnic groups? Quite a high number. There was the end of the 2 months of war in Vukovar. Complete destruction of the city. Because the army didn't want to fight street by street, they decided to shell the city indiscriminately to avoid their own casualties. I will go quickly through the politics for us to understand why we had to be concerned about that. The Tito governed the former Yugoslavia for many years as a dictator. But he was the kind of smart dictator because he took on the Marshall Plan. He separated from Stalin. So he was a good guy in contrast to the other communist leaders in Eastern Europe. And for that sake, you know, he got money from the West. And the money were used or misused within the society for the easy living. What happened then? Tito dies in 1980, and the Iron Curtain goes down in 1989. All of a sudden, There were no good communists and bad communists. There was no need to feed the former Yugoslavia with cheap money. So what happened then? Somebody started asking, to pay this back. And the country got in an economical crisis. An economical crisis is a breeding ground for nationalism. So who came out of this mess? There are two main political leaders that were the most prominent. Was President Milosevic on Serbia. He became the first, if you look at the dates, he became the first of those three. And then Tudjman on the other side, on the Croatian leader. They were very nationalistic, both of them. And then you have Alija Izetbegovic in the middle of it. I put it intentionally in the middle of it because he truly was in the middle of it. Because if you look at it politically, what happened was the Soviet Union, Russia, was supporting the Serbs because of the Orthodox religion and because of the ties. And then the West sort of supported Croats historically because they used to be part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire and for the other reasons. And those Muslims who were in Bosnia, nobody kind of want them. Because in the Serbian, if you talk to the Serbs, but they were saying, they're actually Serbs who were sort of Muslimized. And then Croats were saying, no, there are Croats who were Muslimized. So nobody really wanted that ethnicity. So you have two main supporters. On one side, western part for the Croats and Russians on the other side. And there was a vacuum in the middle of it. And the vacuum had to be filled with something. And the fill was the Middle East money. Because all of a sudden, the countries from the Middle East, with a lot of cash, started supporting the Muslim population in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which historically, a long time, wasn't the case. We talk about the referendum here. I think distinguished colleagues were talking about the referendum. The European Union sort of agreed, in my understanding of that, there will be a referendum. There could be a referendum, and so every state within the Yugoslavia had one. And of course, with a nice feed of the nationalism that came through the media, everybody voted for independence. Slovenes didn't want to be part of it because they historically were part of something else. Croats didn't want to be part of it because they had a coast and a lot of money from the tourism. Macedonia on the east side, Montenegro is about that little if you look at the population. So everybody wanted to somehow be independent. So Slovenia declared independence at the same time as Croatia, 25th of June. But the 10 days war in Slovenia, it was very quick. Serbs had no interest in Slovenia. There was very few Serbs living there. But there were a huge minority in Croatia. So when Croatia declared independence, the European Union asked them to postpone it. And they postponed it to the 8th of October, which was a very smart day. It's my birthday, I can remember it. So on the 8th of October was officially Croatia as an independent state. But in between, something terrible happened. The Croatian defenders of the city, which was almost half and half split between the Serbs and Croats. And the city is on the Danube. It's the very eastern part of Croatia. They wanted to defend the city for Croats. And then Yugoslav army at the time, which was a federal army, because the nationalities were coming out of it, Slovenes left, Croats left, Macedonians left. So the army which was federal, it was supposed to defend the federal country, all of a sudden became Serbian. Even though it was called Yugoslav National Army, but most of the commanding staff started to be Serbs and Montenegrins, and so naturally leaned towards the Serbs. There was a conflict which took about 2 months. You saw the results of it, and the results of complete destruction. You see the casualties and the powers. 36,000 soldiers on the JNA and the Serbian side. Defenders 1,800. You have killed approximately the same people. A lot of soldiers killed on the JNA side. Complete destruction. But what we are getting with this is just for you to see it. to better understand it. I think it's good to see the videos from it. This is when the Croats surrendered and they were taken from the streets, from the houses, they were taken to the hospital. Hospital was supposed to be used as an evacuation point. You see the paramilitary celebrating. Celebration. It's natural, right? You win the war, there's nothing wrong with this. Why would you fight the war to lose it? You fight the war to win it. But why I took this video to show you the emotions. Like these guys who were marching with the black flag, they were actually singing, "We are going to eat Croats for the dinner." Right? So there were nationalistic groups which were hardened through the fights of these 2 months. But their neighbors started killing each other again. No invasion. Neighbors killing each other. So this is the dynamic that we are at. 18th of November 1991. There's the end of the conflict. Croats surrendered. And there was a negotiation between the Yugoslav army, the Croats government in Zagreb, and European Commission. There was a Czech person actually in that commission, and the Red Cross. And they agreed there's going to be evacuation on the 19th. So everybody was asked to come to the hospital. They will be taken out of that hospital and will be taken wherever they want to go. The Yugoslav army stopped that process for a day, delayed for a day. And the purpose for that, because they need to move somebody from the hospital. What's happening now on the 20th November in the morning, the convoy already comes under Red Cross, international community, army. Everybody goes to Croatian hospital to take those people out. And Major Slivančanin, who will be eventually indicted for the war crimes, stopped that convoy on the bridge and tells them, you can't go further because they are still shooting. And the guy from the Red Cross is saying, I'm actually seeing the trucks go in there. What is the problem? And he attacks him saying, you know, if you don't like it here, just go somewhere else. It's my country. You know, we try to be helpful. I try to protect your soldiers. If you don't like it, just go away, basically. What was happening at the time was they loaded 5 buses with about 300 people, mostly men, 2 women, and took them from the hospital to a JNA barracks, which were on the outskirts of the city. And later they took them to an Ovčara pig farm, beat them on the way. Several people were killed, and they kept them in a hangar for the whole afternoon. So this is one thing that was happening on one side. At the same time, you see from this newspaper article, in Belgrade that morning, they had a journalist who came from Vukovar and made a statement to the press saying that they found 40 Serbian children with the cut throats in the school. Now, the fake news into post-conflict situation. I'm pushing the issue because you need to understand that it's not like now here in Prague when somebody says something and it's like, yeah, whatever. You know, these people were fighting each other for 2 months. They won. And all of a sudden they had in their hands those killers who were cutting throat to children. You know, we all are sons or daughters of somebody, and most likely we have children. So that bond is very strong between parents and children. They misuse that, and not for the first time and not for the last time, to affect the people. So they came with this news while that 300 plus minus people were held by the army. And it goes, and it's a newspaper, 8:30 in the evening, like we had it here before. Everybody's watching the news, you know, and they see the news about the Croats cutting the throat to the Serbian children, right? So what happens? The army, which was supposed to protect those people because they surrendered, they were civilians, few of them were the defenders who surrendered weapons. So according to the Geneva Convention, the army was supposed to protect those people. Rather than that, they pull out from this Ovčara farm and leave those, by now, 265 of them in the hands of the Serbian paramilitaries. What happened to them, you can imagine. They put them on the trucks, 20 by 20. They dug a big hole at the end of the wooded ravine where they normally bury dead animals, dead pigs from the farm. So they dig a big hole in it, and 20 by 20, they took them there and shot them dead. When they were done with this, they covered the grave with the bulldozer and left it there, hope it will be forgotten forever.
Muslimanski ekstremisti dosjetili su se valjda najstravičnijeg načina mučenja na planeti. Protekle noći srpsku nejač žive su bacali u kaveze lavovima u zoološkom vrtu Pionirska dolina, tvrdi srpska straža sa Kromolja.
This has nothing to do with Ovčara. I want to show you some other examples of the fake news in conflict or after conflict environment. Now this is about children being thrown to the lions in a hospital in Sarajevo. It actually affected me personally because when I was in Interpol, I took a year of absence. I was seconded to the UNPROFOR. I was in Sarajevo. And there was an incident. I was going every morning from the hotel. I was staying in a Holiday Inn for some time. And there was a little guy, and he was asking me for batteries to Walkman. You know, for those young ones who don't know what is Walkman, it's like an iPad, but, you know, in the batteries. And then, of course, every morning I said, of course, I'll bring you the batteries. And every evening when I came back, I forgot it. Right? So one day I go back to the hotel, and I see this. I just had to put it there because some of those images are drastic, and I just want to pre-warn you for this.
But Sarajevo has yet to enjoy full peace. Unpredictable sniper fire continues to be a daily menace, even on the tramway system. And since mid-November, the number of rocket and mortar attacks into built-up areas has increased dramatically.
As everybody knows, that around the Holiday Inn is the most dangerous part of town. The other dangerous part is Dobrinja and area around the airport.
Meanwhile, the terror on the streets continues unabated, and the number of deaths and injuries is again on the rise.
That's the boy that I've failed to bring the batteries for him, you know? A sniper shot him in the head. It was very personal for him because I know him. You know, I was working on a homicide here. I saw many dead bodies in my life, but dead children, you know, you just can't get over it. So what I'm saying here is, they again use the very basic instincts that we all have. Why they were doing it? You know, they run the news that the Bosniaks, the Muslims, are throwing children to the lions. It's much easier than to shoot them in the head, because now we are killing the other children. They kill ours, so we are going to kill theirs. Now we go to Srebrenica, before I go back to Ovčara. You have 2 years more further in the line. You see on the left side, it's a picture, paintings that was actually painted by a known Serbian artist in 1899. And then, what happened with this? When they were fighting around Sarajevo, the newspaper used that paintings, see, in a black and white, pretending that it's a orphan crying on the grave of Serbian parents which were killed by the Muslims in around Srebrenica. Again, justifying what was happening there in a propaganda, and they use the worst of the possible propaganda to justify what they were doing to the people. And by that, if they do it to us, to this poor little Serbian guy, why we cannot do this to them? It took 20 years. It took 20 years to Radio Television Serbia, to write apology. 20 years. And they apologized for the misleading public in the conflict. 20 years. Now let's go back to Ovčara. Now we deal with this. Now you have a conflict, you have dead people, and then you have international community. It has to do something with it. But we had to first find out what it is, what happened there. So you see the hangar, this is where the people were beaten. This is the short map that shows you where they were taken for the execution. There were two important people in that context. One is Clyde Snow. Clyde Snow was a well-known anthropologist. If you see the hat, you see Indiana Jones was filmed based on his character. And the other guy is Zdenko Novak. Zdenko Novak is a Croat with a Czech background. Zdenko was already on a truck being transported to the execution site. And he talks to this guy next to him. He says, let's jump. He says, you crazy? They're going to kill us. He said, what do you think they're going to do to us? They are taking us in a truck in the night. What do you think is going to happen? No, I'm going to stay. So this guy, Zdenko, jumps and runs and runs and runs. And he's eventually caught by the Serbs, but because of Novak, he could be just about anything. So he said it was a Serb, and he survived this. He was the only person who survived the execution. And with his help, we managed to find the site. You know what, on the war crimes, if you look at it as an investigator, the crime site, the execution site, you see in the movies, that they use the cameras and they just go there and find out, and it's easy to find with dead body decomposition, it heats up and it's all these things. It's very great in the movies. In reality, if you don't know where to look, it's almost impossible to find it. There are mass graves all over the place in the former Yugoslavia nobody ever found because you don't have a lead to take you to a certain place. Zdenko Novak helped us with this one. So, we found, or rather they found, it was before me, they found a skull, they found a necklace which has a Bog I Hrvati, Croats and the God, so that it was clear that probably it's not going to be Serb who will have it in the necklace, with the Croatian sign. So they sent a physician from Human Rights. UN actually asked them, it's an American NGO, and they went there and they tried to do the exhumation. They did a test trench, as you see. They found about 9 bodies in about half meter underground. Then the Serbs came on them and they said, you cannot continue with the exhumation. So they put the UNPROFOR soldiers, a Russian contingent, was guarding the place. And in Croatia, everybody was saying, oh, Serbs, they will make the deal with the Russians, and they are going to exhume it, and there will be nothing there. Nobody believed that there's going to be a mass grave there. Everybody thought that it's going to be somehow negotiated with the Russians. So there was a Russian contingent from 1992 to 1996 was guarding the place. 1993, the UN decides that is enough with what is happening in the former Yugoslavia, and they first sent the Mazowiecki Commission to former Yugoslavia. Mazowiecki was the Prime Minister of Poland, who was in charge of the commission, and their task was to find out what should happen for the Secretary General. Secretary General received the report, and they said, we got to do something about it, and then they established the ICTY. This is something that I would like to, it's about 2 minutes, a video of Madeleine Albright, who was interviewed as a witness in one of those proceedings in The Hague. And it's going to be only 2 minutes, but it's very telling what actually was happening with the establishment of the ICTY and what about the international community thought might happen with this. Can you play it, please?
I'd like to turn your attention to the issue of another matter you touched on, and that is the creation of the tribunal. Could you share with the judges why the member states of the United Nations voted for the creation of a tribunal, what the concerns were, what issues it hoped to address, what goals it hoped to achieve?
Well, I think that all of the people that were involved in it, the permanent representatives and the Security Council, as well as the non-permanent ones, and others who were not on the Security Council, were very much aware that we were involved in something new, though discussing the Nuremberg precedents, that this was not a war of victors, that we were really dealing with a situation that was ongoing, that the procedures had to be established that would not only identify individual guilt and expunge the collective guilt, but make sure that proper punishment was meted out. And it was, in many ways, being present at the creation of a brand new organization. I must say that we ran into a great deal of skepticism. It was easy enough to take the first vote in February to get the tribunal created, but nobody really believed that it would work. There were questions about how the judges would be selected. I must say that especially the women permanent representatives at the United Nations wanted to make sure that there would be women judges, because so many of the crimes had been committed against women in terms of rape and horrendous crimes. And so the judges were then selected by the entire UN system. And then the question was how to get a prosecutor, and that was very complicated, and nobody thought that would happen. And then nobody thought that there'd ever be a court that actually functioned, that would be set on what the precedents were going to be. And we then in May voted on how of 93, voted on how the procedures of the tribunal would work. And then still nobody thought it would work. They said that there never would be any indictees, and then they said there would never be any trials, and then they said there would never be any convictions, and there would never be any sentencing. And at each part along the way, I would point out that they were wrong. And one of the reasons that I think it is so important that this procedure is going forward is to show that they were all wrong, that that the tribunal is very much a part of the international judicial system that is playing a very essential role, I think, in making sure that this individual guilt is assigned, that punishment is meted out, and that there can be reconciliation. I think that was the whole purpose behind having such a tribunal, so that there could ultimately be the reconciliation of the various people that were innocent as a part of this.
Difference between the Nuremberg and Tokyo trials and the ICTY and ICTR is very simple, because the Tokyo and Nuremberg were the tribunals for the victors. Now they won the war, the superpowers won the war, and they can enforce everything, whatever they wanted. You know, they get the witnesses they needed, they arrested the criminals, the war criminals. The tribunal was different because we were on the way. You know, the people were still in power, and we tried to investigate them. It was very challenging. We go back to Ovčara. You know, in 1996, 1997, we were in the middle of the investigation, and then we managed to exhume the Ovčara. We need to find the grave again. You know why? You know, when I was little here, when I was young, there was this saying that iniciativní blbec je horší než třídní nepřítel. You know, somebody with a stupid initiative is worse than the party enemy. You know, that actually happened to us there for different reasons. The UN at the time wanted to help us out, so they cleaned the site, bulldozed it. All the trees which actually had the bullets in them, so they all take it out. So nobody knew where the grave was. So when we came after 4 years on the site, nobody knows where the grave was. So we need to find it. So I'll show you how we were looking for the grave. Can you play it, please?
The grave edge is up there somewhere.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's this string.
It could be.
Come here, here's another string.
Is it going in the right direction?
Yeah.
Is it a meter apart?
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So that should be it.
That should be it.
How far down below that
It's
should we?
22 centimeters to the first piece of clothing.
On the string?
Yeah, which
Okay.
would be original ground surface.
Basically, it means that we are in a correct spot.
Yeah, well, we knew we had 7 meters
Yeah.
to play with.
I'm sorry, what? Plastic bag?
Black plastic. And this may be it, because we did put plastic over everybody. Okay, good.
So in 1992, they put the plastic foil on the test range for the sake of being able to find it. So what we were looking for now, when we were digging there, was actually the foil. So we can prove whether somebody tampered with the grave or not. And we find the foil, so we found out that nobody tampered with the grave. Now, I have to show you, it's very drastic pictures. You need to see the consequence of the fake news in the reality. And I think it's the best way to show it. Can you play this, please? Need to go back a little bit. Okay? Just leave it for the moment. You know, the first was the first body on that. This is when we expose the grave. See, these are our people. It doesn't look like, but they're our people. 200 of them. Just play it. Oh, no. I'll play it.
You want to roll him into the bag. This way. Just roll him over. Just roll him here.
These are the neighbors. Not some strange people from somewhere, nowhere. These are the neighbors.
Oops. Okay.
We spent 7 weeks doing the exhumation. We pull out of the grave 200 bodies. There's still 65 bodies from that group that is missing. There's a mass grave. There's one more grave somewhere there. Nobody found it. We managed to find just this one with 200 bodies in it. So what we had to do with this, we had to transport the body from there to a mortuary when we can actually do the autopsies. Put them in the containers. The transport was like a military operation. Because on the Serbian side, we were afraid they're going to stop the containers to prevent us to take in the evidence outside of the region. On the Croatian side, we were afraid that they will block it, open the containers to see what is in them. There was a big NGOs, Mothers of Vukovar and all of these, very emotional. And they could tamper with the evidence, which will destroy our evidence for the court. So eventually we managed to transport it. I'll go quickly over this. We get them to Zagreb, where the PHR people that were working with us work on 2 tasks. First one, you need to find the cause of death, to find out how these people were killed. And the other one is to identify them, because you cannot charge anybody with a murder if you don't have the body. And if you have the body, you need to prove where the body came from. Otherwise, you know, the court will reject it. So we managed to get the first group, about 80, identified. It was good enough for our indictment. We could prove that they came from the hospital. We proved that they were dead. And we proved their identities. Now, we have a problem, right? We have an indictment, 70 indictments. 70 indictments, 1996. There was nobody in a prison. You see what is nice on this prison in Scheveningen? You know, some of the university dormitories are not that good. You know, it's a beautiful prison, but there's nobody in it. And nobody wanted to do anything about it. That was the problem that we were facing. The former Yugoslavia states didn't want to act, they didn't want to arrest anybody, because if they arrest their own, politically it will be impossible. If they arrest the others, they will be saying, oh, why are you arresting those people and not the other ones? So it's not for us. NATO at the time was saying, we can't do it, we don't have the political mandate to arrest anybody. Okay? So there was nobody to arrest them. And if they continue like that, the tribunal would indict more and more people, but there will be no trials. And it all will go in vain. So something had to do about it. Somebody has to do something about that. So for the Vukovar incident, we identified 3 military persons. The guy on the right is the one who stopped the convoy. The guy on the left is the commander who ordered those troops to pull out from Ovčara. And the guy in the middle was the one who commanded the transport. And then you have Slavko Dokmanovic, who's a mayor of Vukovar, who we had evidence they came to the site and were kicking and beating people there. And then we have the paramilitaries. It's on a sample, I don't have the photograph of all of them. There were 18 of them. They were the shooters. We didn't have at the time access to the soldiers. We indicted them. We requested Yugoslavia to extradite them. They refused it. But I came across over coffee with information about a colleague of mine who was working on the other side. So she was working on the crimes committed by Croats and the Serbs. And she met Dokmanovic in Belgrade. And she didn't know that he was indicted because the indictment was under seal. Nobody knew. Only a small group of people knew that he was indicted. So she came across Dokmanovic and talked to him. And he was willing to be interviewed as a witness for the crimes committed by Croats and the Serbs. So we put together, it took us 6 months, we took together a sting operation in which we managed to, under false pretense, to get him from Serbia, he was hiding, to come to Eastern Slavonia, which is under control of the UN, under pretext of selling his house. We made an agreement for him that he can sell his house because he couldn't sell it and he couldn't live there. So we came with the story that we will help him out and he will meet the General Klein, who was the administrator, and then he will help him to sort it out. So he agreed to cross the border and he asked for the guarantee that the Croats wouldn't arrest him. He wasn't afraid of us because he didn't know he was indicted. He was afraid of Croats. So we gave him a guarantee that Croats wouldn't indict him, wouldn't arrest him, because he didn't lie. We told him the truth. Croats wouldn't catch him. So this is why we arrested him, and I will show you how actually it looks. It was the first war criminal arrested in Europe after World War II on indictment by international organization. The soldiers are the special police from Poland. There's a SWAT team from Poland who work for us. The other guy was a friend of his who just came by and he also wanted to do some private business. He wanted to also probably sell something. So they searched him, they took his bag away from him, which we didn't know that there was a gun in the bag.
Vladimir Dzuro. I'm an investigator of the prosecutor of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia.
Gospodin Dokmanović, ja se zovem Vladimir Dzuro, ja sam istražitelj iz Ureda tužitelja Međunarodnog krivičnog suda za bivšu Jugoslaviju.
You are charged in an indictment and named in an arrest warrant issued by the tribunal.
Vi se teretite u optužnici i vaše ime je navedeno u nalogu za hapšenje koje je izdao Međunarodni krivični sud.
You are charged with the grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions, crimes against humanity, and violations of the laws or customs of war for your role in the beatings and killings which occurred at Ovčara farm near Vukovar on the 20th of November 1991. Do you understand?
Optuženi ste za teške povrede Ženevske konvencije, zločine protiv čovječnosti, kršenje ratnih zakona i ratnih običaja zbog vaše uloge u pučenju i ubijanju na farmi Ovčara u blizini Vukovara 20. oktobra 1991. godine. Da li ste razumjeli ovo što vam je rečeno?
Razumeo sam, ali to nije istina.
I understood that it's not true.
We'll transport this.
Yeah, that's
To po raz pierwszy.
Looks easy. It was 6 months of hard work to put it together. You know, going to undercover to Serbia where we didn't have the legal mandate to try to persuade him, you know, to come along, to come up with this story. It was that moment was very exciting personally. You know, if you look at the little boy here from Buštehrad, the village close to Prague, and then you happen to be doing something like this, it was very satisfactory for me personally. But for the big picture of that, we managed to accomplish with the team. It wasn't me, it was our team. Managed to arrest first war criminal. Nobody got hurt, nobody got killed. We basically killed something, and it was this resentment of the others to do something about it. Everybody congratulated us. You know, President Clinton made a statement, you know, Mr. Solana from the NATO. Everybody was saying it's a great thing, but they didn't like it much because now there was a pressure by the prosecutor on them. If this gang can do it, you have 60,000 troops in Bosnia and Herzegovina, you got to do it as well. You know, there's no justification why you cannot do it. No? We took him in the airplane, we flew him to the Hague, you know, and only in the prison we found out that he had a gun on him, actually, in the bag. Because nobody searched the bag. It was taken by the SWAT team, given to my colleague, and in the airplane he asked, you know, for cigarettes from his bag, and the guy said no. Then he wanted to put the indictment in the bag, and the guy says no. We walked with the gun in the prison, and nobody knew that there was a gun in the bag. Only when my colleague, is a British policeman who never had a gun in his hand, started, you know, putting the things from the bag on the table, he pulled a gun like this, and he says, "Oh, Vlad, what should I do with this?" I said, "Put it around." So the security came there. There was a mess about it because we shouldn't have crossed into the prison. It wasn't the point. Point was, if had he given the bag to him on the airplane, he would be the only armed person on the aircraft. And everything will be different. You know, we will end up somewhere in Belgrade probably, because he will. Now, of course, the defense team that he put together basically challenged whether it was illegal, because they said we kidnapped him. It was a kidnapping, it was an arrest. You know, it was not on a territory which was under control. They come with all kinds of legal arguments. And we need to prove that what we did was legal. And there was a verdict by the judge, MacDonald, that basically says, in the verdict, it's a long verdict, but I will summarize it, that you can use a trickery to get people from one location to another location. As long as you legally put the hands on them, you need to provide them the due process. So they justified the trickery. But from the moment when you physically arrest the person, he or she has got to get a full due process. And by me reading the rights to him, he got the indictment in his own language, he got an interpreter that I can translate from English to Serbian. So we satisfied that, and the verdict was in our favor. It was a groundbreaking verdict that was used a number of times since in the different proceedings to justify the trickery for the arrest of the criminal. What happened then, very shortly after that, NATO couldn't say we can't do anything about it. So they sent SAS troops in Prijedor, and they tried to arrest 3 indicted war criminals for genocide there. One was stupid enough to put up with them, they shot him dead. They arrested the second one, and the third one fled to Serbia, where many years later he was arrested and prosecuted. And then after that, they started to arresting the war criminals, NATO in Bosnia. Then, when the system changed in Serbia, they started also arresting the criminals in Serbia, some Croatia. So, what I'm saying is that our case was a triggering point. I'm very proud of it. But the work that was done on it, you know, it was only the beginning. From now onward, we started having the prisoners in the cells and the proceedings. Now, from that, I just go quickly back to the Ovčara. The tribunal realized that we cannot prosecute everybody. And when the political garniture changed in those countries, they started to push the cases, back to where they belong to, because the tribunal was only established for the reason that the local judiciary wasn't prepared, or local politicians were not prepared to deal with this. So they pushed the case back to Serbia. So if you see, we indicted those 4. 2 were sentenced. The general, he was a colonel at the time, 20 years. The colonel who stopped them, 20 years. The guy who transported them was acquitted. There was no enough evidence. Dokmanovic killed himself 10 days before the verdict. He hanged himself in a prison cell. And the other people you see, they were the shooters. They were actually prosecuted by the courts in Serbia for the mass murder. People will say 6 years, for mass murder. Well, that's how it works. You cannot really influence the decision by the judges. They know best why they sentence them for that many years or not many years. It was a long process, very painful in Serbia. And they should be proud of themselves that actually managed to go through it. It's not easy, for the nationals to prosecute their own for something like this. The tribunal was successful. Now, having said that, some people will disagree with this. And yes, they will say there was an equal. We didn't punish enough Croats and Kosovars and Bosniaks. You're probably right. We probably should have. It's easy to say, difficult to do. We were never tasked politically how many people we should indict. There was this Mazowiecki Commission report, which was used as a basis for the indictment, for the investigations. And then some cases were developed out of it. But overall, there was no criteria about 20, 30, or 60 by nationalities. We were doing that based on the crimes. And now, why Serbs and not the others? I started with this. The Yugoslav army became the Serbian army. They had the logistics, they had the weapons. There's 10 million of them. In contrast, to the others, which Croats is like 4 million. At the beginning of the war, the Croats didn't have the weaponry that the Yugoslav army had. Naturally, you have more people, more weapons, you can commit more crimes. It doesn't mean, and I want to make it clear, that the Serbs will be more criminals than the others. This is not true. If you look at the history, look at the Second World War, when in Jasenovac's concentration camps, the Croats murdered thousands of Serbs and Gypsies and others. The same Croats where they were murdered, some years later. Look at the Nazi Germany, the country of Goethe, and look at what happened during World War II. Look at the Sudetenland and what happened after the World War II here in the Sudetenland. There's no, to my honest opinion, no predetermination that somebody will commit more crimes than the others. It just happened in this conflict that we indicted more Serbs and prosecuted more Serbs than the others. I will repeat it. If you ask me, should it be more Croats and more Kosovars indicted? Probably yes. But the realities are realities. It's a very expensive exercise. The international justice is very expensive exercise. It costs a lot of money, a lot of political will. And not everybody is prepared to put up with this. And that's why we go back to the fake news in the very beginning when I started with this. Sometimes, and very often, it's better to prevent it than to deal with the consequences. And if us, all of us, because it can happen to all of us, it is not true that it happened to some other people somewhere else. It can happen to all of us. Because remember when the Czechoslovakia was splitting? The political tensions and national tensions in those countries, who is paying for whom? Just imagine if the political leadership at the time, I'm not praising them or saying I cannot talk about the politicians because of my employment, but I want to try to say, just imagine if we had at the time Milosevic and Tudjman here, and they start to use, just imagine if there was a big enclave of Slovaks in Czechia or in Moravia or Czechs in Slovakia. and we were fighting for the territory. This is not true that couldn't happen to us. It could have. We are lucky that it didn't happen to us. You know, we should be proud of it because we set an example for the others that it's possible to politically split the country. But it's not automatic. We should be proud of it, but we shouldn't forget that it can come back. I have to do this because my permission to come here was only to promote my book. My employer would not allow me to talk the place like this if I didn't do it for the promotion of my book, because the only time I can speak about things is when I'm promoting my book. So please bear with this. So I satisfied two things. At the beginning, there was the disclaimer that whatever I'm telling you here is my own opinion, and it cannot be taken as an opinion of the United Nations or the International War Crimes Tribunal. And the other, so I have to satisfy that I promote my book. I complete both of those things. I would thank you for your attention. No? This is the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. I don't know if I will know the answer for your questions, but I will try my best.
The lady in the middle for the question.
Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. I was really deeply touched. I am teaching a course on history of nationalism in Central and Eastern Europe, and even if Yugoslavia is not really Central Europe or Eastern Europe, I include always the war in Yugoslavia, and actually this is my longest running course. For the first time I taught it in the fall 1995, so this was when the war was still running. I have a question. I think 2 years ago, perhaps 2.5 or so, there was a small, short information in newspaper that President of International Court of Justice or this tribunal, I am not sure now, who is Slovak or was Slovak, Peter Tomko, that he said that the war in Yugoslavia or the crimes there were not qualified as genocide. And I wanted to ask you, to me it is strange. I was always thinking that this has all characteristics of a genocide, but I am not a lawyer, so I wanted to know your opinion about that.
I'm not also a lawyer, God forbid. I'm just teasing you. Now, back to serious answer to your serious question. You have several courts of law in The Hague. The Dutch are very smart in the sense, they are good businessmen, and it's good for them that they have it there, because The Hague is now like an international city of international justice. So there's something which is called Court of Justice, International Court of Justice, ICJ, and this is where Dr. Tomko works. He used to be as the president of that court. And it was a decision where the states were arguing, you know, before the International Court of Justice, the countries are arguing the case. And nothing to do with ICTY, where the war criminals were prosecuted. You know, it might sound strange, but there are people prosecuted for genocide by ICTY, Karadzic, Mladic, for example, and others. But there are individual indictments for individual people for the crimes committed. Now, the judgment that you're talking about by Mr. Tomka, Judge Tomka, it was before the ICJ. And I wasn't part of it. And you can read it, probably you can find it on their website. But I cannot give you any more qualified answer than that. You know, there are two different institutions. And ICTY was dealing with the individual criminal responsibility for the crimes in the former Yugoslavia, not the states.
The lady up at the back.
Hello, my name is Maja Konstantinovic. I'm actually born 2 years before the war started in Vukovar. And my question would be, every time I go back to Croatia or Bosnia or really any of the Balkan countries that were fighting in this war, and we're talking about Srebrenica or Ovčara or any of the mass shootings where still mass graves are not found. I hear the numbers changing every year, especially on the commemoration days. Usually the numbers are higher than last year because each country wants to claim more victims and say how bad the others were. So I would also say that because your topic was also about fake news, I think that still plays a big role in this area, that there's still a lot of uncertainty about victims. Families are still looking for their family members and don't know what's happening. So maybe it's also kind of understandable that these numbers change all the time because people are still looking for some sort of justice. So I would just like to hear your opinion on how to tackle these fake news that are still going around and that still have a big impact on the reconciliation process in that area.
I'll try to answer this way. You know, you have people who will tell you now that Holocaust didn't happen, right? And they believe in it, you know, and there are millions of Jews and non-German murdered in those camps, and they still tell that the Holocaust didn't happen. The same way I am listening to people when I do the presentations that the massacre in Srebrenica didn't happen, and that these people are somewhere, because Mujo was found somewhere, and then he's not the name of the dead, but you know, he's alive somewhere. You know, things like that. There was no list of people that somebody will have and say, you know, we kill all those people and make like tick, 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 tick. They just gather the people and kill them. You know, there's no evidence of the killings. Like in the concentration camp that they were run by the Germans, they're actually a very sophisticated way of marking who was murdered. Not in Bosnia, not in Croatia. It was completely different. So the figures are going to be different. You know, in my professional experience, you know, we know there is 65 more bodies somewhere buried, you know, in Ovčara. We just couldn't find them, and the Croatian authorities are still looking for them. You know, in some of those cases, they were throwing dead bodies in the water wells because, you know, it's a logistical nightmare. You know, we kill people, it's like two, right? But if you need to do something with those bodies, it's a logistical problem. So rather than digging the graves, they will throw them in the water wells, throw the hand grenade in it, the walls will collapse, and it's a done deal. You know, when we try to exhume it, it's extremely dangerous. We didn't go ourselves, but the people who actually go into those wells, we exhumed dozens and dozens of people from the water wells. Then, when the reintegration was happening in Vukovar, you know, because then the Croatian authorities took over back the territory, we know of the instances where the Serbs will dig the graves and throw the bodies in the Danube. So they floated, and some of them were actually found on the Serbian side, and they were buried as unknown. We managed to exhume those graves. But some of them ended up in Danube, they're gone. Some mass graves are somewhere there, where they are buried, nobody knows where they are. Because if you don't have any insiders who actually come forward and tell you where it is, then you just can't find it. Physically, it's impossible. And then back to the question about the fake news, yes, there will be fake news. You know, usually on my website you see what I'm hearing about, you know, that I'm anti-Serb and you know, what kind of terrible person I am. because I investigated only Serbs. Well, I investigated Serbs only because I was assigned to a team that investigated Serbian crimes in Croatia and Bosnia. Had I been assigned to the team investigating the Croats, I would have done the same. It's a job for me. But you will always have people like this, you know, and the situation in Bosnia-Herzegovina is not easy. I don't follow it that closely, but I saw there were elections, and then completely separate. You know, the Croats in Herzegovina, in that area, the Serbs, Republika Srpska, the Bosniaks somewhere in between. It didn't actually change much. And because of the economical situation as it is there, apparently it's not getting any better anytime soon. So I think that, you know, this all actually put the explosive situation very close. That's something I'm not predicting it, but I'm just saying it's not over, because people still have it in themselves. It will take generations. If nothing happens, it will take generations for the healing process. And unless you have something, what the Germans did after World War II, this denazification, you know, they came with the process of denazification. Unless you have it in the former Yugoslavia, this denationalization, if you will, you know, in all those countries, you know, they will never be any better. If you just go to Google and try to Google it, the nationalistic point, you know, from the Croats and from the Serbs, the Chetnik Ustashas, where the economical crisis will come back to that region. And it can ignite. I'm not predicting it, I'm just saying that the conditions that were in 1990, in 1991, the crisis, political crisis, now we moved decades forward, but the situation is still unstable because of the healing process and because they don't know where the loved ones are. Just look at it ourselves. You know, if somebody murdered your family and you don't know where they are buried, you know, you'll be looking for them. You know, it's not that easy to say, oh, it's just, no, okay, let's put it behind you. You can't really put it behind you if you don't know where the grave of your father is. So you cannot be surprised with the people that they are still looking. It was a long answer for your short question. I apologize for that, but it's not easy to answer.